Kia ora koutou, no mai haere mai, yes, round of applause. This is our amazing panel, looking back, looking forward. And I'm going to introduce each of them. One of the things that you try to do as a host for a thing like this is not give really long introductions, but bugger it, I'm going to, because each of these women have an amazing story. So right next to me is Emeritus Professor Ngahuia te Awekotuku, who has been, yes, give her a round of applause just for that, just for being her. Ngahuia has been a passionate advocate for Māori, for women and lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender rights for over 5 decades now. Yes. She was one of the leaders of the 1970s feminist movement here in Aotearoa, and she has remained an activist. She's a founding member of Ngā Tamatoa, campaigning for Māori language, culture and land rights. She's one of the group who set up Gay Liberation in 1972. She grew up in a family of traditional storytellers, weavers and singers in Ohinemutu in Rotorua. She whakapapas tū Te Arawa, Tūhoi, Ngāpuhi and Waikato. And I'm still going to tell you more about her because this is a great story. She has degrees in English literature, art history and anthropology. Her PhD in 1981 focused on Māori women, the arts and tourism. She was the first Māori woman to receive a PhD from a New Zealand university. She is also the first wahine Māori to become an emeritus professor. She's a poet, an essayist, and award-winning author who writes about culture, tā moko and weaving, as well as crafting fiction and poetry. Round of applause for Ngahuia. Next to her is Theresa Gattung, a groundbreaking businesswoman. She caught everyone's attention in this country in 1999 when she became the CEO of Telecom, which most of you will know today as Spark, at which point she was, this is 1999, the first woman ever to lead a company that was listed on the stock exchange. We're still really short of women CEOs in this country. There are more CEOs called John than there are women CEOs in New Zealand, but it's worth appreciating that Theresa was the first. She was also the co-founder of My Food Bag. These days she sits on the board of a number of companies. She's not just about growing companies and business, but also doing good things by giving money away. She launched the Gattung Foundation in 2021, which is a charity to support the education and advancement of women, Māori and Pasifika. And her other passion is the care and support and protection of animals. And in the 2015 Year's Honours List, Theresa was made a Companion of the New Zealand Order of Merit. Round of applause for Theresa Gattung. It's a frightening gathering of women here on the stage. I'm feeling very small. Arizona Ledger, whakapapas tū Te Rarawa and Whakatohia. She has Samoan, Tongan and Fijian heritage. She is on the board of Counties Manukau Rugby and is also New Zealand Rugby digital content producer. She has a master's degree in human rights and is committed to gender equality and Indigenous representation and governance in sport across the globe. Arizona Ledger. And our fourth panellist, Anna Robinson, is best known by her stage name Robinson. She's from Greymouth, currently based in London, which is quite different. Robinson started putting her music into the world in 2017 and within a few months had written her breakout hit single Nothing to Regret, which led to a global deal with Sony Music and a global publishing deal with Universal Group. And since then, she has been touring the world with acts like Hayley Kiyoko, Lainey, Dean Lewis and One Republic. Right now, she's gearing up to release her second EP, Chasing Nirvana, and she'll be really busy later this year with the Summer Music Festival circuit in Australia and New Zealand. Please make Robinson very welcome. So, Ngahuia, I want to begin with you. There are a lot of firsts in that little brief bio. You know, first PhD, first Emeritus Professor, first for Theresa as well. At the time, did you think about that? Were you aware that you were the first woman who looked like you achieving those things?
First of all, ngā mihi ki a koutou. Ngā mihi kawana ki a koe, Michèle, me o kuhua. No, it never dawned on me. It was primarily because I think a lot of my stuff was done with others. And even though a lot of my stuff too was blocked and was kind of regarded as inappropriate, or in one instance when I went to a Māori funding agency to get money for my PhD study, I was told having such ambition was unseemly for a woman. And why don't I just become a high school teacher? Or a school teacher like a good Māori girl should if she's got a brain. I was born in the 1940s, and so I'm a child of the 50s and 60s, of the revolution, which I like to think I helped to get going here in Aotearoa. And one of the things I really want to emphasise is that ahakoa he aha, whatever we came up against, we felt, we believed, we knew we could get over. Being told, though, by the elderly gentleman of my tribal authority that my ambition was unseemly, not only distressed me, but it fired me up. It was like, I'll show you guys. I'll get this, I'll do it. But I didn't think of it in terms of a first, because the PhD study began primarily from my wanting to write the stories of my community, and particularly my role models, who were the old guides, people like Rangi, like Kiri, like my grandmother Hera. I wanted to capture their stories before they all passed away. And in doing that, Jane and James Ritchie, who may be familiar to some people out there, they said that could be a PhD.
Yeah.
And that's how it happened. Up until then, I was unemployable. No one would give me a job because I had such a loud, queer mouth. And this was not at a time when it was either safe or fashionable. Talking about 1973.
But the courage you're saying comes from, because I'm always interested where people find the drive from. Your courage came from believing that what you were doing was the right thing to do for your community, for your people. Yeah.
And also to just get the stories of these extraordinary older women who had lived in the 19th century, who had started guiding and singing to tourists and having their photographs taken and turned into postcards in the 1890s, early 1900s.
Yeah.
And they were my kuia. They were my great aunts and grandmothers.
Yeah.
And so I felt their stories had to be told. And at that time, having survived gay liberation, women's liberation, ngā tamatoa, I went home back to the village and started writing those stories.
Beautiful. Thank you. Theresa, can I ask you, what on earth possessed you to think that you could be the first woman to run a major company?
It was actually here in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton. I was at Varsity here, and I was in the business school. Very few women in my day, very, very male-dominated, mainly sons of farmers. You know, it's the Waikato after all. And I didn't feel really in place at business school, but I was doing women's studies as well in the School of Politics, and I didn't feel in place there either. But it was that process of reading all the feminist literature, which I really enjoyed, that I realised there were structural barriers for women in whatever we chose to do. And so that got me thinking about, this is a systemic issue. It's not just about barriers that I might be facing. And I've always been pretty determined and bloody minded, eldest of 4 girls of immigrant parents, first in my generation of all our families to ever go to university. And I remember reading a book by Dr. Helen Place. She left New Zealand shortly after that. There were no women running large companies in New Zealand, and at 18 I decided that would be my goal. I didn't think I would be the first. I wasn't trying to be the first. I ended up being the first.
Yeah.
So, but it's got better since then. I do want to say to all of you in the audience, if you can do anything you want. It has got better since my time, but you have to be realistic that the world is not as equal as we would all like it to be. And all of us on stage, we represent 3 generations. We're all doing our bit, but it's a multiplicity of voices. We want this country to be the best that it can be, so that takes all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So for some of your time, Ngahuia and Theresa at least, you were the only people in the room who looked like you. Arizona, I'm going to ask Robinson as well. Are there times where you are the only person in the room who looks like you?
Without doubt. I do think there have been times where I have felt physically like the only person that looks like me or talks like me in the room, but there's this way in which I've been brought up, you know, as a child of my grandparents and as a child of my ancestors, that I'm never alone when I walk into rooms. I know that I have my people with me. Whenever we have empty seats in conference spaces, I picture all those seats with our people, and I'm talking like your ancestors, all of our people are gathered here. We might not see them physically, but when I get to step up and I get the chance to talk, it's not just me that steps into that space. It is everything that I represent and have been brought up with, but not just that. It's the people that will supersede me moving forward. And so, yep, physically, many a time I've looked around the room and seen people who don't look like me, and my throat gets a bit choked up and I don't know if I should say what I need to say. But then there's this quiet voice that speaks to me and says, nah, this is it. This is your time. And you need to carry on the work that's been done before you so that people can continue to do the work after you. So I proudly say, yeah, when I go to spaces and I feel alone, I never am.
Yeah.
And I don't doubt that for a second. And I just want to point to Ngahuia in this part where I'm just hearing the story and a short biography, if anything, of all the things that has been done. I can because Ngahuia did.
Yeah.
I can because Theresa did.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Robinson, what about you? The music industry is kind of famous for chewing up and spitting out.
Misogyny?
Yeah, misogyny. Well, we can say that.
Yes.
Yeah, and not, you know, kind of using women as a commodity rather than making you part of the citizenry.
Yeah, I think, you know, going into the music industry, I was 18, I think. So obviously you're full of ambition and so much excitement, and you think it's all about the music. So you're like, I'm going to make my dreams come true and it's going to be amazing. And it is really beautiful in that space, but I think you're very quickly kind of cast into reality where you realize that, you know, there's a lot of pressure on women to look a certain way, and there were so many conversations about, you know, how to act and how to look and cutting your hair so you stand out more on a billboard. And they were conversations that, you know, that I had that were, I suppose, expected that was a normal thing for someone to say to you, but then upon reflection being like, when did we lose the importance of the music? You know, when did it stop being about the music?
Yep.
And then I think in a lot of different situations as well, you know, you might be going into writing sessions, and when I was younger, I think because there wasn't that representation of women in those spaces, you didn't necessarily think about it. But then as the conversation has become more lively, just realizing, you know, I was like, where are the women? Where are the female producers and the female mix engineers? And I think we have come an incredibly long way, but yeah, it's been a real eye-opening experience.
Arizona, can I ask you, you've been outspoken about women's representation in sport and other places since forever. Can you think of a particular moment that inspired you to take up that challenge?
Actually, I did think about this a little bit. We were told not to overthink our questions. I'm an avid overthinker, so I'm pretending that I didn't overthink it. But that was the one question that really hit home for me, because I don't think it was ever just a pinnacle moment. I think it was the way in which I was brought up. I was brought up to understand that we all deserve to be champions in the arenas that we choose to play in. And I'm not just talking like sport. Yeah. I'm talking the arena. We should have every right to be the champion or the best in our lane, irrespective of who we are and what we represent. And because of that upbringing, my parents very much, or the people around me very much, alleviated and eliminated barriers before I could get to them. And that's why I point to our elders, our ancestors, those who go before us, because there are barriers that I've never faced because they've eliminated them in their time and in their fight. Now, we still face different types of intersectional problems, but it's not at the level at which our generations before us had to face. So in saying that, I did want to point to our young people that are here in the room, that are here, especially in uniform, been there, done that. But this is definitely a point to point to them, because it was during high school that I think I really found my voice and found my place. I boarded at Hamilton Girls High School for 2 years, was a Sonning Hill girl there, and go Sons. And what that allowed for me was the opportunity to see myself against my peers and understand that it's not just up to me, it's up to us as a collective to create change. And when I hear the stories that are being shared today, I think about not just the person who's being discriminated, but that moment where you're sitting in a room and it's not you that's being directly attacked, but you feel that prickle on your neck and you're like, something's not right about this. And it's about that moment, whether you chose to sit there and let it happen, or you really went back and reflected on that moment, or you in that moment chose to do something. There's no right answer to that, because sometimes it is extremely unsafe to enter into those spaces. But listen to that prick at the back of your neck. Listen to that unsettled moment in your stomach. That is you needing to do something and step into your leadership. I'm not even talking at the most highest levels of discrimination. I'm talking to our young people. When you hear that moment in the classroom, when your teacher says something that you don't think is quite right, listen to that moment, because you can step into your leadership at any point in your life. You don't have to wait to be the first in something. You don't have to wait to be recognized as a leader. It's an innate ability that's inside your heart. So when I think about these moments, I just challenge everyone in this room. It doesn't have to be you that's faced with discrimination to then change that game. Dr. Michelle Johansson very, very carefully taught us that we learn the game, to play the game, to beat the game, to then change the game. So if you're not in the arena, we can't make that change, so let's step into that together.
That is amazing. And you're so right that I think we're born with an instinct for what is right, and we shush that voice at our peril, because if you keep shushing it, you lose it. So what you're saying about being aware of it, listening for it, looking for it is really important. I want to ask you another question, Arizona. I feel like sport has been slower in New Zealand at inviting women into leadership. Why?
Disclaimer, it's my last day at my job today, so let's have a go at this question. No, in saying that, it's tough to not recognise the leaders that have made their way into the sporting arena. We're talking Dame Dr. Farah Palmer, she is now referred to as. We're talking about Dame Patsy Reid, who's now stepped in, and I'm only talking from a rugby scene at the moment. But if I can be bold enough, I would say it's just we're not being brave in our ability to appoint leaders, and it's not to say that those that are there aren't brave, but I do think there's a whole potential that exists outside of our current leadership model that we haven't tapped into because we're scared, because right now it works for us, works for us being very exclusive at this point. But I think with the right courage and with the right little tree shakers like myself, we will be able to achieve that at speed. And I think when we look at the World Cups that have been hosted here in Aotearoa, we had Cricket World Cup, we had the IWG Conference, we had the Rugby World Cup, and now we've got the FIFA Women's World Cup here. I think those, albeit being separate events, have been huge movements for women in sport, and it has showcased the importance of why and how good women in sport, not only just being on the field, but the decision makers off the field as well, how we can change the world in terms of not just sport, but why women need to be in leadership, period. Like, we're not just talking for rugby or for soccer, we're talking about the difference, the point of difference that a woman in that top seat can make.
Can we talk about that? I want us all to talk about it. Why is it important to have women in leadership or anywhere.
For exactly the reason that we're just talking about it now. If the decision makers are men, they fund people who look like them. It's human nature. And women's sport has had a huge more profile and impetus in the last few years because finally most sporting organisations in New Zealand have reached 40% women on the boards. And they got there. Why did they get there? Why did they get there? Dollars. Their funding was threatened unless they got to 40% female representation on those boards. Sport's been slow. The top companies in New Zealand, Champions for Change, which support global women, which I chair, those top companies have had the 40-40-20, which means a commitment to their boards having 40% women, 40% men, and 20% either male or woman, whatever makes sense at the time, and on their executive teams 4 years. And now all 60 of them have achieved it. Some of them in every layer of management, but all of them on their boards. And sport has been slow. But look at the powerfulness now that it's happened.
Yeah.
It's like out of the gates, it's made a difference. It's made a difference. Women have to be decision makers. That is the bottom line. We think that the world is based on merit. Who is determining the merit? If men determine the merit, then merit is seen as residing in men. And if Pakeha determine the merit, then merit is seen as residing in us, and there's not enough allowance for the fact that merit is itself a biased concept.
I want to ask all of you if there have been any sliding door moments in your careers, in your lives, and by that I mean, that's the movie that I remember, where, you suddenly see that maybe if you were a man, that would have happened. The trajectory would have been different. I'm aware of a couple in my life where I think, if I was a man, this would have been a moment. Are any of you aware of a moment where things might have been different if you weren't you?
Well, I would have been an investment banker. I would have been.
Yeah.
I had an honours degree in business. I was asked to do honours in law. I didn't because I was already working. I would have been a prime candidate for those roles, but I was a woman. So I would have been an investment banker, and I probably would have ended up at, you know what rhymes with that, so.
What about you?
If the Te Arawa Trust Board had funded my PhD, then I wouldn't have had to work in motels, scrub swimming pools, chop wood, and make whatever money I could make while I was doing my fieldwork to support the thesis. I would have been like other Māori men who were sent off to the different universities with buckets of money to support their lifestyle.
Yeah.
So, there's obviously still quite a lot of bitterness in there.
I do think as well, maybe the relationships with a lot of those powerful men that are in those positions would have maybe gone a lot differently. For me, there was definitely so many situations where there's that kind of power imbalance where you're young. That's already something that's kind of difficult because you're entering something for the first time and you have no idea. There's no experience there. And then I think there can be those like power imbalances where it's easy for those men in those powerful positions to tell you who you are and what you are. But I really loved what you were saying about feeling your intuition, because there's so many times that I ignored my intuition. I was so afraid to speak up, and I was like, well, maybe this, this is normal and I just have to deal with it. But then I think, over time, just really realizing how so many of those situations were so wrong. And I think, to the other people that are thinking of entering the music industry or any industry, and like you were saying, that feeling comes up, it's so important to even maybe talking about it is the most important thing, so then you have that power in people. But yeah, it is a scary place to navigate at times, but I do love where we're at now.
I mean, mine wasn't so much a sliding doors reference. I think mine's a bit closer to Beyonce's If I Were a Boy, but that's all that's been playing in my head while I'm listening to everyone. I'm like, if I were a boy, what would I do? And I thought back to a moment where I had addressed the triennial judges conference this year. Judge Marlossi sat me down and said, "Oh, Zona, Bub, why don't you think of becoming a lawyer?" And I said, "Hell no. Like, that's not for me. I would get kicked out of the courtroom. It just wouldn't work." And she said, "Sometimes, Bub, it's not about what we want to do. It's about what we need to do." And I think when I think about that, and you ask me what would have been different if I was a man, I would have been able to do what I wanted to do and not what I needed to do for my people, for myself. And I don't know what that would have been, but at least I would have had the novelty of being like, I can do whatever I want because I don't need to do that. Whereas growing up, we had a gifted responsibilities that we have to achieve in our lifetime as an Indigenous daughter of the moana.
Yeah.
We don't have a choice sometimes.
Yeah.
So it would have been nice, but I don't regret anything about being a girl. It's the bomb.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would have been able to do what I want to do.
What else do we... Oh, something's broken. I hope it's the patriarchy. What else do we need to work on? What is our shopping list of things that we need to get done now? Actually, before I ask that, can I ask you two what you're glad has been achieved by feminism that you don't have to deal with? Is that a crazy question?
That's a great question. I feel like making... Oh, it's such a loaded question too, isn't it? Making men aware of, the space that women need to hold. And I think, so much to do with the Me Too movement, and there's definitely been a lot of really toxic, abusive kind of relationships that I've witnessed within the music industry. And I think through women having that bravery, because it's so difficult to come out and speak out, it has created that kind of fear where there's definitely people now that are like, oh gosh, I can't do that anymore because I might get called out. And it feels a bit sad to me in a way that that's why someone wouldn't treat you in a particular way. But I think there's accountability now and knowing that women are speaking out about different things. So I think that, that to me makes the industry that I'm in feel safer, and hopefully it's the same with other industries too.
I love to hear that. I think that's great.
There's a lot of things that I'd like to, list off and be grateful for that. Well, not just feminism, but that, the fight has really achieved for us. Probably the immediate one that comes to mind is knowing that I'm sitting in a panel like this alongside women who have fought the good fight and continue to fight the good fight. We get to have these discussions without umbrellas coming our way and getting stormed off the stage. But equally, I'm going to point to my mother on this one, who this year graduated with her Doctor of Education at University of Auckland. And I want to point to her because it's taken about 8 to 9 years for her to do that. She's raised 3 kids. Whilst doing that, she's worked a full-time job. And it's not a pity story, it's a victory story, because to sit on a panel with Ngahuia and know that my mum gets to be a Māori woman who graduates with her doctorate because someone did it first, we get to be the legacy for those moments. And I don't take that lightly at all. So it's less about now for us being the first. It's more about what are we going to do to make it sustainable. Mm-hmm. So a huge mahi to Ngahuia for that.
I think some things are done, or at least feel in a good space. Abortion rights, finally out of the bloody Crimes Act and seen as a health issue, and you just got to look at America to go, oh God, never.
But doesn't it freak you out that we might lose things we've won? They don't stay won?
Well, that I think is really entrenched. But, my whole message is you've got to celebrate you've got to hold on to what you've won, not take it for granted. But what's done, that's done. What's done? A girl can be a Prime Minister in New Zealand. A girl can be a CEO. A girl can be a global singer. A girl can be anything. Agnes Naira, the Māori CEO of Global Woman, we've sort of got a bet on when New Zealand's going to have a Māori woman Prime Minister. When is it going to be the first woman of colour is going to be a Prime Minister, the first woman of colour to run an organisation in New Zealand that isn't an iwi organisation? So that's undone. We still don't have a gender pay equality. The gap has been 9% for a decade. That compounds over time to end up with women having less financial equivalency all through their lives. Menopause is still not spoken about. It's full of whakama and shame, and it's a silent resignation at the other end of the workforce that does need some serious attention, because it's not like it's only an issue for one woman, right? So there's much to be done, and yet I'm hopeful about New Zealand. I do think the energy of New Zealand is a we can do this, and a collaboration and a celebration together. And the sporting, we're here partly because of what's going on with this particular women's sport events, but women coming together and gathering always, for me, feeds my spirit.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Ngahuia, what do we have left to do?
I'm feeling really quite, celebrating what has been shared, and I'm really grateful to hear your comment, ngā mihi. I also think too that another really hopeful and amazing achievement in the last few years here has been the whole period movement. And that's a tiny, tiny, tiny initiative, but it has impacted the lives of so many young girls. And it's actually come out of their own energy and their own initiative. And I really congratulate you all for doing that. It's necessary. There's a hell of a lot to celebrate. There's so much that we can really think about having kind of started, but as Theresa said, we've got to keep the momentum going, and we must take nothing for granted. Roe versus Wade, people took that for granted, women took that for granted. Look at what happened. And so even if it is entrenched, it could turn around and bite us in the bum. Similarly with gay marriage, with civil unions, with the decriminalising of gay sex in 1986. All of that, generations of that, because it's 3 generations now. We can't trust the systemic racism and patriarchy that is still lurking out there in our communities. And right now, this year, being election year, we are seeing the symptoms of that disease still here in Aotearoa. Even if we do feel really good about what we've done, there's a hell of a lot of work that we need to do. What, though, absolutely enthralls me is looking, because as I said, I was born in the 1940s, is looking at the little ones coming through. And they are fabulous.
They are, aren't they?
Absolutely. So I have every faith that things won't go backwards. We won't let that happen. No. We won't.
No. We're almost out of time, but I am going to ask each of you to briefly tell us what advice you would give to your younger self to help them thrive. And I'm going to start with you, Robinson.
Oh, what advice would I give to help my younger self thrive? I think I would tell young me to really trust her intuition and to know that she's on this path for a reason. And I think there's many times, over the sense of the journey where you do lose that faith, and you might, I've seen how the industry is, and sometimes you just think, I just want to leave it and go live in a cottage somewhere away from it all. But I think, your place is here to fight, and it's to make the things you want to make and to do what you want to do, and you're so capable of doing those things. You just have to have that belief. And I think, in those situations where you come up against discrimination, to really listen to that intuition and to not back down, keep the fight going. I think that's what I would say to me and other people.
Yeah, fantastic. Arizona.
Firstly, I would tell her that your mum's not actually an evil person. Even though you fight with her, it's because she cares about you and she loves you, and she's challenging you now because there will be moments that you face by yourself when you're older that you're grateful for the fight that you had with your mum when you were 13. I would then let her know that everything she's about to do has its time and has its moment, good and bad, but that the actions that she takes today determines the ancestor she becomes tomorrow. So be brave. It's scary, but she's not alone. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Beautiful.
I would say life is a marathon, not a sprint. You don't have to achieve everything between breakfast and morning tea. You can have it all, but you just can't have it all at once. And it's important to, to go at a pace that you can enjoy your life and not just be totally goal-driven. I was very, very goal-driven in my 20s, and I had my first sort of major health issue like at 26. That's how spookily uncaring I was of my physical body. And so understanding that life is long. It's great, and you can make mistakes. When a young girl says to me, what should I study at university? I go, it doesn't matter. What you'll be doing when you're my age doesn't exist at the moment. Just follow what you want to do, what you like to do. Be a wayfinder. I've always been a goal setter, but now I'm much more of a wayfinder. I think that's a better way to do life because it's so inherently uncertain. We cannot control nearly as much as we'd like to think we can control. So best to check in with that intuition, surround ourselves by people that we love, who love us, and wayfind together.
I love this.
Stunning.
Ngahuia.
All of everything they said, actually.
Yeah.
And listen to your puku. Listen to that quirk. Take hold of it. Notice it. Don't turn away from it. And be as brave as you can, as often as you can. That's what I'd say to me at 16.
Yeah.
Oh, and maybe watch your mouth.
But not too much. Not too much.
No, that's a really good one.
You four are amazing. Ngā mihi mai oha kia koutou. Thank you all so much. Please give our panel a round of applause.